Jake Carter had faced death before. Plasma fire, ship explosions, even a particularly aggressive vending machine back on Mars. But nothing prepared him for the way an entire alien war council recoiled in sheer horror at the sight of a flop-eared, tail-wagging golden retriever puppy. General Quark, an 8-foot-tall insectoid nightmare, took a slow, cautious step back. "By the void," he hissed. "You brought the beast." Jake blinked. He looked down at Biscuit, who was busy trying to catch his own tail. "Yeah," Jake said slowly. "Total nightmare." And that's when the aliens drew their weapons. Jake Carter had been in plenty of bad situations before. Plasma firefights, ship crashes, even a bar brawl with a four-armed mercenary who really didn't like losing at poker. But this was something else entirely. He stood in the middle of a towering war chamber, his wrists bound in cold restraints, surrounded by creatures that looked like nightmares sculpted from obsidian. The Zalari War Council loomed over him, their exoskeletal frames bristling with rigid spines, their many eyes glowing like embers in a dim-lit forge. Every movement they made was slow, deliberate, as if any sudden motion might trigger an attack. At the center of it all, perched on a raised throne of black steel, was General Quark. 8 feet of hardened chitin, mandibles twitching, his clawed hands gripping the armrests like he was ready to crush them into dust. "Human," Quark rumbled, his deep, guttural voice filling the chamber. "We have studied your kind. We have observed your wars. Your ruthlessness. Your creatures." Jake exhaled through his nose, barely holding back an eye roll. "Right. And what, exactly, do you think you know?" Quark leaned forward, his amber eyes narrowing. "We know that your species is dangerous. Not because of your technology. Not because of your numbers. But because of the beasts you command." Jake blinked. "Beasts?" A murmur rippled through the War Council. Quark raised a clawed finger, pointing directly at him. "The Terran war beast. The apex predator you used to devastate enemy ranks. A creature so fierce, even the strongest of our warriors feared to face it." Jake's brain stalled. "I'm sorry, what?" One of the Zalari warriors stepped forward, a hulking brute covered in jagged armor. His mandibles clicked as he hissed. "Do not pretend, human. We have intercepted your transmissions. We have heard the name of this creature. You speak of it with reverence. With admiration." Jake's mind raced. What the hell were they talking about? The only animal he'd been talking about lately was... Oh no. A sinking realization settled in his gut. "You mean Biscuit?" Quark's mandibles flared. The chamber grew eerily silent. "Yes," the general said, voice heavy with suspicion. "This... Biscuit. The harbinger of destruction." Jake's face twitched. He barely managed to bite down on the laugh clawing its way up his throat. "Right," he said, clearing his throat. You guys do realize Biscuit is just a... Bring in the beast!" Quark barked. A pair of guards approached, carrying a secured containment device, one of Jake's personal effects from his confiscated gear. They placed it on the floor before him, activating its retrieval sequence. A soft hum filled the air. A small blue light blinked. And then, a golden retriever puppy materialized in the center of the war chamber. The reaction was immediate. Several Zalari warriors recoiled. One actually hissed and took a full step back. A ripple of uneasy clicking noises spread through the council as Biscuit gave a happy little shake, wagging his tail before plopping onto his hind legs with a panting grin. Quark didn't move. His claws slowly tightened against the throne. "So," he muttered. "It has arrived." Jake stared at the War Council. Then at Biscuit. Then back at the War Council. "You have got to be kidding me." Biscuit let out a soft bark. The Zalari flinched. Quark rose from his seat, staring down at the small, fluffy creature. "It is smaller than I expected." "You think?" Jake said dryly. The general tilted his head. "A deceptive form. No doubt a lure to lower its prey's defenses before it strikes." Biscuit yawned. A Zalari warrior drew his weapon. Whoa, hey! Jake snapped. You do not point a plasma rifle at my dog! Kvorik lifted a hand, signaling the warrior to stand down. His gaze never left Biscuit. Explain, the general ordered. What are its capabilities? Jake opened his mouth. Shut it. Considered his options. There was no way they were being serious. No way an entire war council, an intergalactic empire, was actually afraid of an 8-pound golden retriever. He could correct them. He could tell them that Biscuit was just a puppy, that humans kept them as pets, that they were mostly harmless aside from occasional shoe destruction and overeager licking. Or, a slow, dangerous grin crept across Jake's face. You really want to know? He asked. Kvorik's eyes narrowed. Speak, human. Jake knelt beside Biscuit, scratching behind his ears. The puppy gave a pleased little whine, leaning into the touch. Jake looked up at the War Council, making his voice as serious as possible. This is a Terran war beast, yes, he said, nodding solemnly. But you see, this is just a pup. A juvenile. They are born into battle, trained from infancy to be the perfect combatants. A fresh wave of murmurs rippled through the chamber. This one is still in its early stages. Jake continued, gesturing to Biscuit, who had flopped onto his back and begun wiggling happily across the floor. But when fully grown, they become unstoppable. The Zalari warriors exchanged uneasy glances. One of them whispered, How many of these beasts do humans possess? Jake exhaled dramatically. Millions, he said. Across every human colony. The murmur turned into a roar. Kvorik's mandibles clenched. Impossible, he hissed. No species could tame such numbers of such a dangerous predator. Jake shrugged. Humans did. And we don't just control them. He leaned in slightly. We live among them. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Then Kvorik let out a slow breath. We must test it. Jake barely had time to react before Kvorik snapped his claws. A heavy metal door rumbled open, and from the shadows, something huge emerged, a Zalari battlehound, all fangs and claws, its eyes glowing red as it snarled. Biscuit wagged his tail. Let us see, Kvorik said, eyes gleaming. If the legend is true. Jake stared at the growling alien beast. Then at Biscuit, who had just sneezed and started sniffing the air. Well, this was about to get interesting. The Zalari battlehound prowled forward, claws scraping against the metal floor, its fangs bared in a deep, guttural snarl. The creature was massive, easily the size of a Terran lion, with black armored plating running along its spine and 6 glowing red eyes locked onto its tiny, oblivious opponent. Biscuit sat down. Jake stood frozen between them, watching as his golden retriever puppy cocked his head, clearly unimpressed by the monster before him. The War Council loomed in tense anticipation, their multifaceted eyes glinting in the dim chamber light. General Kvorik raised a hand. Let the battle begin. Jake's stomach twisted. Whoa, hold on. You can't expect a puppy to. The battlehound lunged. Biscuit barked. The sound wasn't loud, nor particularly aggressive, but the moment it left Biscuit's mouth, the Zalari hound froze. Its 6 glowing eyes flickered. Its legs stiffened. Then, with a shudder, it collapsed onto its stomach, tail tucked between its legs. A collective gasp filled the war chamber. Kvorik stood abruptly. Impossible. Jake blinked. He looked at Biscuit, who was happily wagging his tail. Then at the battlehound, which was now rolling over onto its back in complete submission. Jake muttered. You guys seeing this? The Zalari warriors whispered in hushed, frantic tones. One warrior pointed an unsteady claw at Biscuit. The beast commands lesser predators. Another recoiled. Its dominance is absolute. Kvorik's claws flexed against the armrest of his throne. His mandibles twitched. This is a trick. A deception. Jake whistled softly. Biscuit's ears perked up, and in an instant, he bounded toward the fallen battlehound, his tiny paws tapping against the cold floor. The monstrous creature whimpered, flinching as Biscuit leaped onto its side and licked its snout. The battlehound made a noise that Jake could only describe as a whine of pure defeat. "Yeah," Jake said, rubbing his temple. "I don't think this is the brutal battle you were hoping for." The Zalari warrior closest to the hound stumbled backward. "A single touch, and our greatest predator falls." Another slammed his fist against the table. "This is why humans are feared. They do not conquer with force. They enslave with submission." Jake coughed. "I really wouldn't use the word enslave." Kvorik was silent. His mandibles twitched in agitation as he studied Biscuit, who had now flopped onto his back, belly exposed, looking as unintimidating as possible. The Zalari murmuring grew louder, filled with a strange mixture of fear and reverence. One of them, an elder with dull, cracked exoskeleton plating, stepped forward. His voice was low, almost reverent. "It is as the ancient texts foretold." Jake frowned. "Wait. What?" The elder turned to Kvorik. "Do you not remember the prophecy? The tale of the unassuming terror? The creature whose mere presence bends warriors to its will?" Another warrior stiffened. "I thought it was a myth." The elder's eyes remained fixed on Biscuit. "It was written that a being of small stature, deceptively innocent in form, would arrive among us. That its power would be unknowable. That it would not fight its enemies, only reduce them to obedience." Kvorik's claws tapped against the throne. "And you believe this creature matches the legend?" The elder knelt. "Look at the beast before you. It has already claimed one of our greatest hunters. What more proof do we need?" Jake looked down at Biscuit, who was happily chewing on his own tail. "You guys cannot be serious." One of the Zalari warriors, still visibly shaken, turned to Jake. How do you control such a being?" Jake sighed, crossing his arms. "I give him belly rubs and feed him peanut butter." The elder gasped. "A sacred ritual." Jake groaned. "No, it's not a... The human speaks in riddles," another warrior muttered. Kvorik had heard enough. He stood abruptly, his towering form casting a long shadow over the chamber. His deep voice cut through the frantic whispers. "This changes nothing," he declared. "One beast does not prove supremacy. The human's trickery is convincing, but it does not shake my resolve." Jake raised a brow. "Oh, that's what you're calling it." The general ignored him. He gestured to a nearby Zalari guard. "Bring me the combat data. If this creature is as powerful as they claim, we must test its abilities further." A warrior hesitated. "General, is that wise?" The elders. Kvorik's claws scraped against the metal throne. "Enough. We will not abandon reason for superstition. We are warriors, not cowards." Jake exhaled. "Oh yeah, sure. Because everything about this has been reasonable so far." The guard rushed off. Kvorik turned his gaze back to Jake. "You will remain here until we understand the full extent of this beast's power." Jake crossed his arms. "Or, and hear me out, you could just accept the fact that he's a puppy and let me go." Kvorik did not dignify that with a response. Instead, he turned and exited the chamber, leaving Jake surrounded by wary, awestruck warriors, and a very pleased Biscuit, who had just finished licking the face of the defeated battlehound. Jake sighed. "This is going to get dumber before it gets better, isn't it?" Biscuit barked happily. Jake sat on the cold metallic bench inside what he could only describe as an alien war laboratory. Enormous consoles lined the walls, flashing with streams of data in an unreadable script. Zalari technicians scuttled around, inputting commands while warlords observed through a massive viewing window. The atmosphere buzzed with tension. Biscuit, the alleged unassuming terror, yawned and stretched his tiny paws over Jake's lap, utterly unconcerned. Across the chamber, General Kvorik stood tall, arms crossed, his 6 eyes fixed on the glowing monitors. "We will conduct a series of controlled trials," he announced. "If this beast wields true dominance over predators, it must prove itself under rigorous conditions." Jake rubbed his temple. "Okay, let me get this straight. You're seriously running combat experiments on a puppy?" The general's mandibles twitched. Silence. The first test begins now. A heavy metal gate rumbled open, revealing a Vrakian shadow cat, a sleek, four-legged predator with razor-sharp claws and an adaptive cloaking ability. It let out a low, predatory growl, eyes locked onto Biscuit. Jake tensed. Are you kidding me? That thing looks like it eats nightmares for breakfast. The Zalari commander beside Kvorik turned. The Shadow Cat is one of the deadliest hunters in the known galaxy. If the human's beast can subdue it, there will be no denying its power. Jake sighed. Or, we could just not do this. No one was listening. The Shadow Cat circled Biscuit, testing the ground, waiting for the right moment. The air grew thick with anticipation. The moment stretched. Then Biscuit wagged his tail. The Shadow Cat froze. It took a slow step back, ears flicking uncertainly. Biscuit, seeing a potential playmate, trotted up, tongue lolling out. The Shadow Cat hissed and immediately collapsed onto its side. Gasps erupted from the viewing chamber. Jake blinked. Oh, come on! The Shadow Cat whimpered as Biscuit clambered onto its side, happily nuzzling its fur. The once deadly predator let out a pitiful chirp, completely disarmed. One of the Zalari scientists clutched his head. It is worse than we imagined. It dismantles the minds of predators without a single strike. A warrior trembled. No creature can resist its control. Kvorik's claws tapped against the console, visibly irritated. This is inconclusive. Initiate the second trial. A door hissed open, and a Tarkhan rage beast stomped forward. This one was huge, all muscle and armored plating, standing at least 10 feet tall. Unlike the Shadow Cat, it did not hesitate. It charged straight for Biscuit. Jake shot to his feet. Whoa! That thing's not stopping! Biscuit did not react. He simply rolled onto his back. The rage beast skidded to a halt. It trembled, nostrils flaring, every muscle seizing up. Then, with a confused grunt, it lowered itself onto its belly. Jake exhaled. Of course. Why would I even be surprised at this point? The ray beast, once an unstoppable force of nature, now lay sprawled across the floor, completely docile. Biscuit happily climbed onto its back and curled up, tail wagging. One of the Zalari scientists let out a shaky breath. We are witnessing history. Another warrior clutched his chest. This is why humans are feared across the cosmos. They do not conquer planets. They conquer beasts. Jake crossed his arms. I swear, if one of you writes a religious text about my dog, I'm leaving. Kvorik's 6 eyes locked onto Biscuit, the only creature in the room completely unaffected by the mounting hysteria. Begin the final trial. We will push this being to its absolute limits. A new door rumbled open, and for the first time, even the Zalari warriors themselves took a cautious step back. Jake frowned. Why do you all look nervous? Then the Abyssal Stalker emerged. Jake's breath caught. This thing was different. It was not an animal. It was a void-black, multi-limbed horror, its body shifting and folding in ways that made Jake's stomach churn. It had no eyes. No discernible mouth. But the second it entered the chamber, an overwhelming sense of dread filled the air. The scientists flinched. A warrior gritted his teeth. This thing is pure instinct. It does not submit. It does not hesitate. Kvorik exhaled. Then let us see if the beast truly holds power over all. Jake clenched his fists. Okay, but seriously, at what point do we admit that you guys have lost your damn minds? The Abyssal Stalker shifted. Then, without warning, it lunged. Jake barely had time to react before. Biscuit yawned. The Stalker halted. It did not freeze in fear. It did not collapse in submission. It simply stopped. Then, slowly, it lowered itself to the floor. Kvorik took an involuntary step forward. Impossible. The chamber was silent. Warriors, scientists, and commanders alike stared in horror and awe. Then, the Stalker curled up. Like a house cat. It let out a low, guttural rumble, something not unlike a purr. Jake covered his mouth. He had no idea what the hell he was witnessing. The Stalker, a being that defied all known logic, had surrendered itself to a tiny, golden-furred puppy. And Biscuit? He flopped onto the stalker's side and fell asleep. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the warriors whispered, "This is not a beast." Another exhaled, "This is a god." Kvorik's claws clenched. Enough. His voice wavered, barely perceptible, but there. His soldiers, his scientists, his entire species had just witnessed the unthinkable. His grip on logic itself seemed to be slipping. Jake, meanwhile, just groaned. "Great. You guys are actually making a religion out of my dog." The elder from before knelt before Biscuit's sleeping form. "It was written. The one who would come, bending all to his will." Another Zalari warrior hesitated. Then he too knelt. Jake ran a hand down his face. "I cannot believe this is happening." Kvorik exhaled sharply. "Take them both to the High Council. If this is the will of the gods, we must prepare." Jake threw up his hands. "Prepare for what?" But no one answered. Biscuit was already snoring. Jake sat in the center of a colossal, cathedral-like chamber. Ornate alien banners lined the walls, displaying symbols that, just a few hours ago, had probably represented military supremacy. But now, they had been altered. He could guess what the new emblem was. The shape of a tiny, sleeping dog. Biscuit, blissfully unaware of the galaxy-wide hysteria he had caused, snored in Jake's lap, his little legs twitching as he dreamt. Jake exhaled. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think you just got deified." A loud gong echoed through the chamber. Jake looked up. A massive door swung open, revealing a procession of high counselors. Their long ceremonial robes swept across the floor as they moved, their expressions solemn. The lead counselor, a tall Zalari with 6 golden eyes, raised his staff. "The time has come." Jake arched a brow. "For..." The counselor gestured toward a raised platform. "The official recognition of the Divine One." Jake groaned. "Oh, for Fu." Before he could finish, a massive crowd knelt in unison. Hundreds of Zalari warriors, scientists, and dignitaries bowed their heads to the sleeping puppy in his lap. Jake blinked. "You guys are serious?" A younger Zalari warrior, probably a scribe or historian, stepped forward, eyes filled with reverence. "We have searched for centuries for the being that would bring even the fiercest predators to heel. No entity in recorded history has accomplished this feat." A scientist adjusted his glasses. "Not through violence. Not through force. But through a will so great that even the abyssal stalker yielded." Jake pinched the bridge of his nose. "That will was tail wags and belly rubs." The counselor ignored him. "Our people are at a crossroads. War has defined our existence. Strength has been our sole guiding principle. But now, the very foundation of our beliefs has been shattered." He gestured toward Biscuit. "A being of unmatched power, yet infinite gentleness. We must heed this revelation." Jake stared. "You're actually rewriting your entire culture over a puppy." Kvorik, standing at the edge of the gathering, clenched his fists. His jaw twitched as he spoke. "You cannot be serious. This is absurd. Our fleet has crushed entire civilizations. Our soldiers are the pinnacle of warfare. And you would abandon our ways over this?" He pointed at Biscuit, who let out a tiny snort in his sleep. The High Counselor's gaze was steady. "You witnessed it yourself, General. Are you suggesting the evidence is false?" Kvorik's mandibles clenched, but he said nothing. Jake leaned back. "Look, I get that this is a big deal for you, but you're talking about a complete societal overhaul. You can't just..." The High Counselor raised a hand. "We must adapt. If we do not, we stagnate. And stagnation leads to ruin." Murmurs of agreement spread through the chamber. Jake ran a hand down his face. "Okay. Let's say, hypothetically, that I go along with this. What exactly do you want from me?" The High Counselor exhaled. "The Divine One has chosen you." Jake narrowed his eyes. "I don't like where this is going." The younger scribe knelt before him. "You are the first disciple. Jake's eye twitched. I am what? Another counselor stepped forward. You have been graced with the presence of the Divine One. It is only fitting that you serve as the voice of his teachings. Jake groaned. His teachings involve eating shoes and chasing his own tail. The High Counselor nodded sagely. And yet, through such simple acts, he has tamed the wildest beasts. There is wisdom beyond our comprehension. Jake buried his face in his hands. I cannot believe this is happening. Kvorik let out a sharp exhale. Enough of this farce. He stepped forward, his imposing frame towering over the kneeling Zalari. You're telling me that our warriors, our leaders, are going to submit to a human pet? His voice was laced with venom. The High Counselor's gaze was firm. Not a pet. A force beyond reckoning. Kvorik's mandibles clicked in frustration. I will not stand for this. Our people have built an empire through strength. I refuse to see us reduced to worshipping a creature that cannot even speak. Jake shrugged. Honestly? He might still be a better leader than some of you. Kvorik's eyes burned with rage. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. If the Divine One is as powerful as you claim, then surely he should be able to prove it against me. The room fell dead silent. The High Counselor's expression darkened. You challenge the Divine One? Kvorik's voice was ice. I challenge you all. This is madness, and I will not let our people descend into delusion. Jake held up a hand. Whoa. Let's pump the brakes here. You're seriously challenging a dog? Kvorik's mandibles twitched. I challenge you, human. He pointed a claw at Jake. If you claim to be his chosen disciple, then stand as his champion. Jake stared. You're challenging me to a fight? Single combat. If I win, this absurdity ends. Jake exhaled. He looked down at Biscuit, who was now sprawled out, belly up, entirely unaware of the high-stakes political battle being waged over his existence. He glanced back up at Kvorik. You know what? Fine. But if I win, you have to do one thing. The general's eyes narrowed. And that is? Jake smirked. You have to say out loud that my dog is stronger than you. Kvorik's mandibles flared. Agreed. Jake cracked his neck. All right then. He stood, carefully setting Biscuit down on the ceremonial platform. The puppy stretched lazily, then curled back up. Jake turned to Kvorik, rolling his shoulders. Let's dance, bug man. The High Counselor raised his staff. Then let it be decided. The crowd erupted into a thunderous roar. The chamber pulsed with anticipation. The vast assembly of Zalari warriors, priests, and scholars surrounded the combat arena, their luminous eyes locked onto the two figures standing at its center. Jake. A human, an outsider, armed with nothing but wit and sheer audacity. Kvorik. A seasoned general, bred for war, clad in battle-scarred armor. Between them, resting atop the ceremonial platform, Biscuit yawned. Jake rolled his shoulders. Just so we're clear, you're really doing this? Kvorik's mandibles twitched. Your delusions end today. The High Counselor lifted his staff. By sacred tradition, this duel shall decide the path of our people. He struck the floor, sending a resonant chime through the chamber. Begin! Kvorik lunged. Jake barely had time to dodge as the towering alien came at him with terrifying speed. Clawed hands swiped through the air, missing him by inches. He ducked, sidestepped, and rolled away, but Kvorik kept up the pressure. The general sneered. Your kind relies on machines and weapons. Without them, you're nothing. Jake exhaled, heart pounding. That's funny. Your Divine One doesn't have weapons either, and he kicked the crap out of your apex predator. Kvorik snarled and charged again. This time, Jake was ready. He pivoted at the last second, using the alien's momentum against him. Kvorik stumbled forward, momentarily off balance. Jake seized the opening. He threw a punch, only to feel a wall of muscle and exoskeletal plating beneath his knuckles. Pain shot through his hand. Ow! 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 He shook it out. Great! You're built like a goddamn tank. Kvorik recovered instantly, his 6 eyes gleaming with contempt. You are weak, Jake grimaced. Yeah, well. Before he could finish, Biscuit stirred. The tiny pup, disturbed by the commotion, stretched his legs and let out a sleepy woof. Then, he trotted straight toward Kvorik. The general, in the middle of his next attack, froze. Jake blinked. Oh. My. God. Kvorik took a step back. Biscuit wagged his tail. His little nose twitched as he sniffed the air, then, without hesitation, he pounced. Right onto Kvorik's foot. A ripple of shock spread through the chamber. The mighty general of the Zalari war host, one of the most feared warriors in the galaxy, stood rigid, his entire body trembling. Jake covered his mouth. No way. The crowd gasped. Biscuit licked Kvorik's talon. The general stiffened. His mandibles clicked erratically, his claws curled inward. The invincible warlord was frozen in place. Jake grinned. Oh, this is amazing. The whispers began. He does not retaliate. The Divine One has chosen mercy. Even the strongest warrior cannot resist its power. Jake fought back laughter. I swear to God, if they take this as another sacred revelation. The High Counselor's voice rang out. The trial has spoken. The chamber fell into absolute silence. The elderly Zalari stepped forward, reverence in his every motion. Even in the face of aggression, the Divine One shows no wrath. No vengeance. Only patience. Jake whispered under his breath. He literally just woke up. The counselor raised his staff. It is decided. He turned to Kvorik. Will you deny the truth before you? The general stood motionless. His 6 eyes darted toward Biscuit, who was now rolling onto his back, demanding belly rubs. Kvorik inhaled sharply. His shoulders slumped. And then, before the eyes of the entire Zalari High Council, he knelt. A collective gasp spread through the audience. Jake's jaw dropped. Holy shit. That actually worked. Kvorik, gritting his teeth, forced out the words. The Divine One is stronger than I. The chamber erupted. Priests wept. Scholars feverishly documented the event. Warriors clashed their weapons in ritual acknowledgement. The old belief system had collapsed in an instant. Jake just stood there, hands on his hips, trying not to laugh. The High Counselor turned to him. You human! You who have guided the Divine One through this journey. Jake sighed. Let me guess. Another title? The counselor's eyes gleamed. Yes. He knelt. You shall be the chosen herald. The speaker of the divine will. Jake pinched the bridge of his nose. I am not starting a religion. The younger scribe rushed forward, eyes glowing with enthusiasm. But you must. The teachings of the Divine One. The teachings are just nap often and give belly rubs. The counselor placed a hand over his chest. And in these simple truths, we find infinite wisdom. Jake threw his hands up. All right. Fine. Sure. Let's pretend this all makes sense. What happens now? The counselor gestured to the assembled crowd. We will spread the word. This day marks the dawn of the Age of Serenity. A time of peace, guided by the will of the Divine One. Jake shook his head. I still can't believe this worked. Biscuit, oblivious to his galactic sainthood, rolled over and let out a soft, contented snore. Jake sighed. Well, buddy. He picked him up, holding him close. Looks like you just changed an entire civilization. The High Counselor bowed. With this, we officially renounce the old ways. No longer shall conquest define us. The Divine One has shown us a better path. Kvorik exhaled sharply but said nothing. Jake smirked. See? You lost to a puppy. The general growled under his breath. Say that again and I will end you. Jake laughed. Too late. History is already being rewritten. The High Counselor turned to the crowd. From this day forth, we are not warriors of war, but guardians of the Divine One. Jake groaned. Oh, come on. The chamber exploded into cheers. Jake sighed, scratching Biscuit behind the ears. Welp. Guess we just accidentally became galactic prophets. Biscuit wagged his tail.